Good morning and a very warm welcome to all that are joining us today. It's great to see so many people signed up to the session, and we hope to make it as practical and as relatable as possible so you have a number of takeaways, key takeaways from the session. My name is Sarah Alford. I'm Head of Employment Law and a partner at Berry Smith, and I'll be chairing this morning's session. I'm delighted to introduce the speakers for today's session: Dr Laila Kaikavoosi, who's a founder and a clinical director of the online Menopause Centre, who's a leading clinical expert in the field of menopause. So we're delighted to welcome you. Good morning, Laila. I'm also delighted to welcome my colleagues. We've got Caitlin Rees, who's an associate solicitor within the team here at Berry Smith, and Elena Vaughan, who's also a solicitor within the team. So in terms of what we'll be covering this morning, well, it's going to be a session on how to help and support those members of staff that are going through the menopause with a clinical focus, so we as managers are informed when having discussions. In terms of the objective of the training, well, the aim is to give you a better understanding of the menopause and how to support those members of your team that are perhaps going through the menopause. And as a result, hopefully you can put this knowledge and understanding into practice, which will give you the confidence to make decisions about how best to deal with staff situations concerning the menopause. We'll have around, hopefully, if it all goes to plan, about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So please do use the Q&A function. Put your questions in that Q&A function, and I'll put those to Laila or Caitlin at the end. So in terms of what we'll be covering in today's session, so what is the menopause and perimenopause? What are the common signs and symptoms? How can the menopause affect employees in the workplace? We'll be running through some employment tribunal cases. What are the business and financial implications, and how us as employers can provide support? So why should we take action now? Well, long and short is that menopausal women are actually the fastest growing demographic in the workplace. We're an ageing population with fewer new entrants from education joining the workforce. Therefore, us as organisations, we need to look after our middle-aged workers to have the talent that's going to be needed to run our businesses. And what we often find is that these women, these middle-aged women, are often at the top of their game in terms of management and leadership positions. And therefore, employers find it extremely difficult to backfill these roles, and quite expensive too, in fact. In our experience, what we found is that employers have been a little bit hesitant to recognise that women of menopausal age may need special consideration. And for far too long, it's been seen as simply a private matter, if you like. And as a result, it's very rarely discussed, and many managers will have no or indeed very little awareness of the issues involved. And this means what we found is that women kind of tend to feel they need to hide their symptoms and are less likely to ask for adjustments that may help them. And this has actually, in fact, led to 900,000 women leaving our UK workforce due to the effects of menopausal symptoms. So it's quite staggering. And obviously, aside from the legal ramifications of that, it's a total waste of talent to lose any of our workforce due to the menopause transition, especially at a time where we're working so hard to close that gender pay gap and obviously the pensions gap as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Dr Laila. Thank you, Laila.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your introduction. My name is Laila Kaikavoosi. I am the founder and clinical director at the Online Menopause Centre. Online Menopause Centre was set up on the principles of delivering a convenient and affordable service to menopausal women. We set up in January 21, and over the last 2 and a bit years, we've treated over 1,000 patients. As well as delivering menopausal consultations, we also help employers to achieve an awareness about this topic in the workplace and to make life and work environment a better place for their female and for their menopausal employees. Yeah, Caitlin, can we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, you're here to understand more about menopause. So I'll get going with that. What is menopause? Menopause essentially is a natural physiological process that every woman between the ages of 45 to 58 will go through. The average age in the UK is 51. And the word menopause essentially means a cessation of the menstrual cycle. And it is diagnosed when the cycles have stopped for 12 consecutive months. So it's essentially a retrospective diagnosis, and one that one can make at home themselves, because you don't really need any special investigations in order to diagnose menopause. Perimenopause refers to the time around the menopause, and it is a little bit of a more challenging time, both for the person going through it and for the treating clinician. And I'll spend a little bit more time on this perimenopause in the next slide. It's really important at this point to mention that I refer to menopausal woman and her symptoms, but there are those who experience these symptoms that no longer identify as women. Anyone who's experienced female puberty can experience symptoms of menopause. And also that there are a vast number of women, over 13 million women in the UK currently, that are going through peri or menopause, and that makes up about a third of the entire UK female population. So it's a really relevant topic that affects a lot of our population. Next slide, please. Great. So this slide is all about perimenopause, which basically is around the time of the menopause. This can happen a few years before menopause or up to a decade prior to menopause. And the challenge with this is because of the fact that the woman is still experiencing either regular or irregular menstrual cycles, she may not sort of link her emergence of her symptoms to changes in her hormone levels, and therefore may not think that it's anything to do with her the change that she's going through. Also, it's a challenging time for a clinician who may not be a specialist in this field, because the woman can have multiple consultations with their GP, for example, about various different types of symptoms, ranging from headaches to changes to menstrual cycles to achiness, and therefore that clinician might not think that this could be related to hormonal variations. It also, generally speaking, this time in life usually coincides with increasing family, social, and professional responsibilities. And it's easy to then sort of blame these sorts of changes that life is throwing at us, rather than the hormonal changes as a cause for the emergence of these symptoms. So this slide is basically the data presented by British Menopause Society, which highlights the fact that menopause is everyone's business, and not just the problem or the business of the person going through it. The reason for this is because it affects so many different parts of life, and those four squares basically show this. It affects the person's social life, as well as her intimate life, as well as her work life, as well as her partners, because the partners who live with people going through menopause are also affected by this change, and that therefore it's really important to raise awareness for colleagues and anyone who's involved with and cares for that person. Essentially, the main or the most important or relevant statistics on this slide is the fact that 45% of women said that their menopause had negatively impacted their work, but almost half of them didn't actually disclose this to their employer. There were a variety of reasons for this, but it sort of revolved around stigma and fear of demotion. But there were other causes as well why they wouldn't disclose what they were going through and why they were taking time off work. Next slide, please. I spoke about the average age of menopause being 51 in the UK, but we know that menopause can happen at a much earlier age. Early menopause is under the age of 45, And premature menopause, or premature ovarian insufficiency, as it's also known, occurs under the age of 40. There's a variety of reasons why a woman can experience menopause at an earlier age, ranging from her genetics. Often women follow their first-degree female relatives as to when they reach the menopause, but it can also be related to other treatments that she's receiving. For example, a woman receiving cancer treatment, chemotherapy, radiotherapy, that can affect her ovarian function, and it can push her into early menopause. Also trauma, accidents, major surgery, things like that can start menopause at a much earlier age. In about 1 in 100 women, menopause occurs under the age of 40, and 1 in 1,000 experience menopause under the age of 30. And of course, that has huge implications both to their family life, if they wish to conceive, and also to emergence of chronic diseases. I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but as well as the symptoms that we'll go through, of course, menopause can affect our chronic disease as well, or incidence of chronic disease. Next slide, please. So I've split we'll go through the main or the common symptoms of menopause and perimenopause. They're similar. So the symptoms that a woman experiences at perimenopause and menopause are essentially the same. What is different is that at perimenopause, because her ovaries are still functioning, but they go through times when they function a bit more or a bit less. So her symptoms can be waxed and waned, although when she goes through menopause and her ovaries have totally stopped functioning, she continuously experiences. So she doesn't have a break from the symptoms. So that's the main difference between the experience of the symptoms. The physical symptoms, the top two are the ones that generally people have heard about, the hot flushes and night sweats. And these are not just feeling a little bit hot and sweaty, but it's a real sort of uncomfortable and a sudden rise of heat from chest upwards, which can result in redness, which can be embarrassing at situations. It can result in palpitations or rapid heartbeat. Some women actually feel a bit faint with it and they need to lie down. Night sweats, of course, as you can imagine, it can disturb sleep significantly, and of course the function of the woman the following day. Insomnia or disturbed sleep, whether it's difficulty falling asleep or waking up multiple times, even in absence of night sweats, this can happen. And it's quite an early symptom as well. So a younger woman in her maybe late 30s, early 40s can experience emergence of insomnia. And it can be quite disturbing for her function the next day, especially in the setting of work. Joint and muscle pain, so early morning stiffness or just general joint ache, and depending on what she does. So, for some women, depending on their job, that's more relevant. So, if you're a professional gardener or you're typing and using your small finger joints and you're experiencing stiffness and pain, you can imagine that of course, creates a lot of problems at workplace. Headaches, which could be early, sudden onset headaches and new onset migraines, or just worsening of a pre-existing migraine that was well controlled in the past, and now, although she's doing exactly the same things or taking the same precautions, but her migraines are no longer under control. Gritty eyes or itchy eyes is actually quite a common symptom. So all mucosal membranes that are supposed to be moist for their function, they become dry, and that causes symptoms. Tinnitus or ringing in the ear, thinning hair, itchy skin, or an uncomfortable sensation of insects crawling under the skin, which can be very disturbing. Or even sort of some women explain this, they talk about this sensation of needles just randomly pricking them, although there's, that's how the sensation of it. Weight gain, which seems to be a universal issue with all menopausal and perimenopausal women, and it really is a topic discussion at every consultation, and that's due to changes in both metabolism and muscle fat sort of balance, and urinary symptoms that can be very disturbing and very difficult to control in the setting of work especially. So that's frequency of urination and urgency, so needing to go immediately, and recurrent urinary tract infections or cystitis. Of course, this is not all the symptoms. We have hormone receptors on almost every organ in our body. So every woman experiences these symptoms in a different combination. They may just experience one or two of these, or they may have a whole host of symptoms. And the severity can be very different, ranging from just, a few hot flushes here and there to, over 20 hot flushes during the day, and quite severe ones. So yeah, we'll go through the next slide, which talks about the psychological symptoms, which, if not equal, but it could be even more disturbing than the physical symptoms. That's again, there's a high percentage of anxiety in women who have never felt anxious before, in fact, or in women who are even under treatment for a clinical anxiety, but well controlled. And now that they reach the age of perimenopause, the control is no longer there. That's because the hormones play a significant role in our neurotransmitters that control our mood. So you can also feel quite low and tearful, irritable, and losing temper quite quickly. Brain fog, which has been named as one of the top symptom that disturbs women who are at work. And it's not difficult to understand why. You're trying to do your day-to-day work, and you just can't concentrate, and it all becomes very foggy. So it's difficult to then achieve the same level of productivity. Poor memory, focus, and concentration, having to read and reread that to-do list or email, and forgetting what you had to do next. Reduce motivation and interest altogether, feeling quite low in confidence, and just a general reduction in zest for life, which is both in workplace and socially, personally. So this is a short animated video that takes us through the life of Mary, that goes through a day in work and dealing with her menopausal symptoms. Maybe we can watch it together.
Mary is 55 and is menopausal. Her symptoms have had a big impact on her life. Here's how a typical day for her pans out at the moment. She often struggles to sleep at night, often waking due to night sweats. On her daily commute, alongside fatigue, she's become more prone to headaches, which can last her entire journey. It's not a great start to her day. At work, she finds the office very stuffy and frequently has hot flushes. She feels very self-conscious about this. Since she turned 50, she also finds the need to use the bathroom more frequently and urgently. Today is during her lunch break, and she worries about what her colleagues are thinking. Outside of work, her mood can change erratically, and she finds herself more irritable. Her husband finds this very stressful and confusing. She also noticed her hair is starting to thin. She loves her thick hair and feels less attractive because of this. She goes to bed feeling very low and is hoping she finally gets a good night's sleep.
Thank you, Caitlin. So the next couple of slides, I thought we'll concentrate on hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, which is the main treatment for menopause and even for perimenopause. Of course, not every woman can take HRT, and that has to be sort of, you go into details of it to assess the risk and benefits of it for that individual woman. Majority of people can now, because there are so many different varieties of HRT. And there are different reasons why women decide to take HRT. The obvious one is to control the symptoms that we went through, and they arise from deficiency of these symptoms. So basically, deficiency of these hormones. So essentially, you're replacing the hormone that is missing in order to alleviate the symptoms. But also, HRT is really helpful to delay or to prevent some diseases that the woman has a genetic predisposition to. So for women who have a strong family history of osteoporosis, or early onset Alzheimer's, dementia, or early onset cardiovascular disease. So they have heart disease known in the family. They can, HRT can sort of delay the onset of these symptoms. So it can be helpful for them to take it. So generally speaking, women have a better cardiovascular health up until the age of menopause when you compare them to men. And that's because of mainly because of the action of estrogen in their body. But once they stop producing estrogen, that protective measure is also gone, and they are at the same risk as their male counterpart. And also HRT is useful as sort of some supplementary management of some inflammatory diseases, some autoimmune diseases, for example, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, or there is a condition called Hashimoto's, which is basically autoimmune thyroid disease. And a woman who have a predisposition to these autoimmune diseases, so they have a family history, for example, they tend to, the disease tends to show up at round about perimenopause and menopause, and that sort of is evidence for the protective measure that estrogen, progesterone play in her health. And so therefore there are, I see women who actually have very little or very sort of insignificant symptoms of menopause, but they want to consider going on HRT because they have a significant family history of some chronic diseases, and they know about the protective measure the hormone replacement plays in their health. Next slide, please. Yeah, I thought we'll go through some myths about HRT because there are a lot going around, and I hear a lot of this in consultations. So I'll go through the top ones that are regularly concerns women. One is that you're too young to be menopausal. So younger, everybody has I think a typical image of a menopausal woman of a certain age and certain look that is experienced. But of course, you can be much younger than that. We just looked at the statistics. So 1 in 100 women are under the age of 40 and 1 in 1,000 under 30. So age shouldn't be the sort of factor to dismiss or not consider the diagnosis. You can't take HRT because of risk of blood clots. That was the case with the older types of HRT, and the more modern type, which is biologically identical, is no longer carries that risk of blood clot. You can't take HRT because of increased risk of breast cancer. Now, this is a topic that really creates a lot of anxiety for all women. Breast cancer is unfortunately common, and the link with HRT was studied in a study which is Women's Health Initiative, WHI, about 20 years ago, and it sort of it created a lot of anxiety in women who were taking HRT because the branch of study that with the woman on HRT was seen to have a higher incidence of breast cancer, and so the study was stopped. But in fact, we've moved on quite a lot from that type of HRT used in that study. They were artificial and synthetic hormones, whereas now we've moved towards biologically identical, which means that the chemical structure of the hormone is identical with what the woman produces from her ovaries. HRT increases the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. In fact, I just talked about the protective measure it has on cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, etc. And you must stop HRT due to age. So that was the advice that people used to get once they reached the age of 60, or if they had been on HRT for 10 years, they were asked to stop taking it. But we no longer say that. So it's individually based, and we can carry on for life, basically. You can't start HRT because you're so many years postmenopausal. Almost every few weeks, I see a woman with this. So they say that they're, whoever they saw, the healthcare provider told them that they shouldn't or they can't take HRT because of the fact that, you know, they're in their 60s or 70s. But, you know, people's health profile changes as they age, and it may be that they can no longer have new emerging symptoms for which they need to take HRT. The next slide, I have concentrated on the explaining on the risk of breast cancer, because of the fact that, you know, it's something that interests every single woman, regardless of whether they're thinking about HRT or not. But British Menopause Society published this visual chart, and the right-hand side is just the enlargement of the left, so you can just look at the right larger version of it. And it basically tries to explain the risk of developing breast cancer amongst background population, people who take HRT, and people with certain lifestyles. So the top line with the blue figures, that's the background risk. So there's 23 new cases of breast cancer diagnosed in the UK per 1,000 women in the next 5 years between the ages of 50 to 60. So that's just the, you know, everyone's risk, basically. And for women who take HRT, there's 4 more risks. That's the next line down. And for those who only take estrogen, because, for example, maybe they've had a hysterectomy and don't need to take progesterone, the third line with the 4 green figures shows less risk. So in fact, the new version of estrogen that often women take it across their skin in a form of a patch or gel, things like that, that doesn't seem to be increasing the risk of breast cancer. I think the most significant thing is, or line or the visual that you should be looking at, is the second from the bottom, which basically shows that the risk has doubled. And that is in women with a high BMI or body mass index greater than 30. So being overweight, being a current smoker, drinking 2 or more alcoholic beverages per day, that significantly increases the risk of overall cancer, including breast cancer, far more than being on HRT, which can in fact help with sleep, with recovery, with engaging in healthier living and exercise, which can reduce the risk. So it's good to sort of put it in perspective and look at not just look at HRT in isolation, but general lifestyle. I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Laila. That was extremely helpful. I definitely learned some new points there. So thank you very much. I'd now like to hand over to Caitlin, who will walk us through a little bit about what the law says on menopause.
Morning, nice to meet you all, and thanks Laila for that. Like Sarah said, that was really interesting, and I'm sure a lot of you will have some questions for Laila when we come on to the Q&A section later on. But in the meantime, in the next part of today's webinar, we thought it would be helpful to cover off some legal aspects in terms of menopause in the workplace, and more specifically, an employer's legal obligations. So diving right in, when it comes to the menopause, what is an employer's legal duty of care? Well, currently in the UK, there isn't any legislation specifically relating to the menopause. However, some legal protection does exist for employees experiencing workplace problems relating to menopause via existing health and safety legislation and equality law. In fact, under the health and safety legislation, employers have a general duty to ensure, so far as is reasonably possible, the health, safety and welfare at work of all of their employees. In addition, employers have a duty to carry out risk assessments. So it goes without saying that risk assessments should consider the specific needs of menopausal women and ensure that the working environment will not make their symptoms any worse. The law states that those carrying out risk assessments must have had sufficient training and experience or knowledge. So it is imperative that risk assessors have undertaken menopause awareness training in order to recognise any risks to health for those going through the menopause. Now, whilst the Health and Safety Executive has not published any specific guidance referring to the menopause, ACAS and the TUC in Wales do provide some helpful guidance on what menopause-based risk assessments should cover, including temperature, uniform, rest spaces, toilets, and training for managers and supervisors. So we would certainly advise checking out this guidance for more information. In our experience, many employers are not aware of some of the health and safety issues that the menopause can present, or they're not aware of the need to carry out risk assessments. So it is really important that this is noted. So now that we've briefly addressed health and safety, what about the Equality Act? Well, under the Equality Act 2010, the menopause isn't a protected characteristic at the moment. But if an employee or worker is put at a disadvantage and treated less favourably because of their menopause symptoms, this could amount to discrimination if the discrimination is related to an existing protected characteristic. So successful claims have been brought in the tribunal with regards to the menopause on the basis of sex, age, and disability. Therefore, employees asserting menopause-related workplace discrimination, harassment, or victimisation can bring claims in the employment tribunal, and it's crucial that employers are aware of this. In our view, there are several limitations at the moment with the Equality Act, and we as lawyers are left often having to shoehorn claims arising from menopause-related discrimination into the specific camps of age, sex, or disability, which don't fit with the unique combination of factors concerning the menopause. Therefore, women who are discriminated against because of their menopausal symptoms are often put off bringing claims because of the uncertainty of the outcome. They'd ultimately have to establish that their symptoms were severe enough to either amount to a disability and trigger a duty to make reasonable adjustments, or they would have to demonstrate that they've been treated less favourably than a hypothetical younger employee or male employee suffering similar health conditions. So, for example, brain fog, lack of concentration. So establishing less favourable treatment because of age or sex rather than the menopause on its own is extremely difficult. Although you can bring a claim based on more than one ground, employees do need to get home and dry on proving less favourable treatment on each ground alone, which is difficult because, as you would have heard from Laila, the menopause is so intersectional in nature. However, there is no provision within the Equality Act at the moment to bring a claim based on dual characteristics of both sex and age. So there is a risk of falling between the two stools. However, having said this, we have seen an increase in the number of employment tribunal cases citing the menopause over the past few years, and I'll come on to some examples in a moment. But just before I move on to the next slide, it's quite interesting that in 2022, the Women and Equalities Committee published a report whereby 12 recommendations were made with regards to reforming the law around the menopause. And as part of this report, 2 specific recommendations were to launch a consultation on how to amend the law to make menopause a protected characteristic under the Equality Act and to afford menopausal women with the right to reasonable adjustments at work. However, unfortunately, these proposals were rejected, and the government's justification for this rejection rested on the basis that creating a protection only afforded to women may inadvertently discriminate against men. Now, this is really disappointing because a failure to even consult on this point is a missed opportunity and fails to acknowledge that the UK economy is in desperate need to retain talent and ensure that women are economically active in later years. So in terms of the legal side of things, we still have a little bit of a way to go. So moving on to the next slide, I just want to address some recent employment tribunal cases citing the menopause to put what I've just said into practice and into perspective. So you'll see the first case mentioned on the slide is that of Merchant versus BT plc and the issue of sex discrimination. So just some facts to set the scene. So in this case, Miss Merchant was underperforming in her role and had been subject to the capability or performance management process a number of times and was unfortunately up to a final written warning. The issues with her performance were continuing and her employers were at the point where they were deciding whether to offer her alternative employment or to dismiss her. Miss Merchant at the time provided her employers with a letter from her GP during such discussions, which said that she was going through the menopause and that this did affect her level of concentration. The performance management process that BT had in place at the time said that there must be an investigation into whether anyone's underperformance was due to health factors. However, despite this policy, the manager conducting the process decided not to investigate the possible impact of Miss Merchant's menopause. And he relied upon his knowledge of the menopause from the symptoms his wife and another colleague experienced. And as you would have heard from Dr. Laila, symptoms are wide-ranging and are different from case to case. So in this case, Miss Merchant was dismissed. And she did bring a claim for unfair dismissal and direct sex discrimination, and she did succeed with both claims. And the failure here to refer Miss Merchant for an occupational health assessment following the letter from her GP setting out her symptoms before deciding on whether to dismiss was considered to be direct sex discrimination. In fact, the tribunal in this case said that a man suffering from ill health with comparable symptoms and with performance issues would not have been treated in the same way. So this case is a useful reminder to employers of the importance of failing to follow a fair process. Now, we've also got the case of A versus Bon Marsh Limited on the slide. And in this case, just to summarise, Miss A had worked in retail for 37 years and she was a high achiever. However, her situation at work changed in May 2017 when she began to go through the menopause. Miss A's male manager in this case would demean her and humiliate her in front of other staff who were younger than Miss A. And in fact, the manager did refer to Miss A as a dinosaur in front of customers and continually criticised her unreasonably. So as a result, Miss A contacted higher management regarding her manager's treatment of her, but unfortunately no action was taken. Miss A later suffered a breakdown in November 2018, and her manager was extremely cold and threatening towards her when she returned to work, and this ultimately led to Miss Merchant handing in her resignation. The tribunal in this case upheld Miss A's claims for sex and age harassment based on the conduct of her manager. So a reminder here that manager training with respect to the menopause is crucial and something that employers should explore. And then last but not least, we've also got the case of McGabe v Salazar on the slide. Now, in this case, an employment tribunal held that Salazar Limited had subjected Mrs. McGabe to age discrimination when it dismissed her at the age of 55. And in this case, the CEO of the company had made comments such as, "Calm down and don't let the menopause, the hormones, get out of control." As well as other demeaning and offensive comments. And these comments ultimately, together with evidence that the company had asked a recruiter to look for a younger person to replace Mrs. McGabe, did lead the tribunal to conclude that at least part of the reason for Mrs. McCabe's dismissal was her age. And accordingly, her claim of age discrimination was successful. So as you would have seen, in addition to claims of unfair dismissal, direct sex discrimination and disability-related discrimination, the other types of claims that employers could face with regards to the menopause include indirect sex and disability discrimination, sex, disability and age-related harassment, victimization, and a failure to make reasonable adjustments. And these claims can be hugely time-consuming, expensive expensive to defend, and damaging for an employer's reputation. Now, moving on, I think it's important to just briefly touch upon the business and financial considerations for businesses in relation to the menopause, as there's quite a bit to think about here. Now, when it comes to recruitment, interestingly, according to Oxford Economics, it can cost around £30,000 to replace women who leave the business. And this includes direct recruitment costs and bringing a new member up to speed. Therefore, if employers can support those employees going through the menopause, hopefully this in turn will mean that less women will leave work. On the topic of absence and sick leave, according to the Office of National Statistics, the groups of employees who experienced the highest rates of sickness absence included older women. So again, if employers can ensure that these women are provided with support, and we'll come on to what that looks like in a moment, then hopefully this will mean that less women will need to take time off work when experiencing menopausal symptoms. Another financial consideration to take into account here is the cost of employee retention issues or tribunal matters. And the average cost of defending a tribunal case can be in the region of £10,000 to £15,000, which doesn't include any cost of compensation. Now, on top of this, tribunal matters can also damage a company's reputation and use up valuable time and resources. So again, it's crucial to take this into consideration when thinking about the support measures that employers can put in place and ensuring that the line managers have received adequate training. And then another important business implication to take into consideration is that if more and more menopausal women are leaving the workplace, employers could be losing women at the peak of their experience, which will in turn have a massive impact on the business and productivity, and valuable talent and experience is lost. In addition, this can also have an impact on gender pay gaps and also feed into disparity with pensions and diversity, which is another hot topic at the moment. So it's important that the menopause, in a nutshell, is normalised in the workplace, which in turn will hopefully lead to a happier and more comfortable workforce. And as a result, businesses will be able to retain their staff and all the knowledge and experience and expertise that they bring. And hopefully workplaces will become more diverse and inclusive. And I'm just going to pass across to my colleague Elena, who is going to go through some practical considerations for you.
Thanks, Caitlin. What employers can do is what is expected of any employer who wants to attract and retain a diverse and inclusive workforce. This starts with creating the environment to talk about menopause openly and without embarrassment. It's a natural phase in every woman's life that needs to be normalised. So what employers can do is provide training for employees and managers to raise awareness and convey that the menopause can present difficulties for women at work. They can initiate occupational health campaigns, discuss the topics at management meetings, expressly mentioning transition in diversity and equality training sessions, implementing informal support at work for mid-aged women, such as workplace networks, online support groups and helpline numbers, having in place a fair sickness absence policy which accommodates women experiencing transition, improve the working environment, including access to fans, good ventilation, the ability to control temperature, having clean and comfortable toilet facilities near workstations with appropriate sanitary disposal bins and feminine hygiene products, and also have access to female-only showers if possible. They can review control of workplace temperature and ventilation and see how they might be adapted to meet the needs of the individuals. This might include having a desktop fan in an office or locating a workstation near an opening window or away from a heat source. Consider flexible working hours or shift changes. If sleep is disturbed, later start times might be helpful. Provide access to cold drinking water in all work situations, including off-site venues. Ensure access to washroom facilities and toilets, including when travelling or working in temporary locations. Where uniforms are compulsory, flexibility is helpful. This might include the use of thermally comfortable fabrics, optional layers, being allowed to remove neckties or jackets, as well as the provision of changing facilities. Where work requires constant standing or prolonged sitting, having access to a restroom would be helpful, as would space to move about for those women in sedentary roles. In customer-focused or public-facing roles, it may help to have access to a quiet room for a short break so as to manage a severe hot flush. Organisational cultures within the workplace are really important. A culture should be created whereby women feel supported and can discuss any transition symptoms affecting their working lives with managers and colleagues alike. Managers need to encourage the development of shared organisational values, beliefs and norms within which menopause transition, like pregnancy, is acknowledged as a natural process, and midlife women are freely able to request adjustments to their working conditions. This means all staff need to be aware of what transition might entail. Several studies also say women are more likely to speak up about symptoms where they feel they have empathetic colleagues or managers, and support from others is highly valued when women do disclose. As such, improving understanding of this gender-specific period of a woman's life and its possible effects in the workplace is seen as central to cultural change initiatives around transition. Mandatory equality and diversity training covering gender and age, and the menopause specifically, is frequently identified as something employers should introduce. The group most in need to such training is managers, so they can embody the open and supportive culture discussed previously and lead by example to other members of staff.
Thanks, Elena. So just building on Elena's discussion there, just some very practical advice for managers in the workplace. And some of these tips may sound really obvious, but you would be surprised at how many employers do get the basic stuff wrong here. So as you'll see from the slide, we've got, first of all, be approachable and available to talk. It's a personal kind of medical condition with the menopause, and some employees might not be willing to come forward. So if they've got a manager that's open and approachable, that's going to make it a lot easier and more comfortable for the employee to discuss any kind of symptoms and how the employer can help. We've got don't offer medical advice and signpost employees to further support. A lot of employers won't be medical experts, and it's important that medical advice isn't given, and that's where kind of referrals to outside practitioners like the Online Menopause Centre would come into play there. We've got show empathy and don't assume. And like I was mentioning earlier, that one case where the manager relied on the symptoms that his wife was experiencing to reflect them onto one of his employees. So the importance of not assuming, no case will be the same. Some practical tips in terms of policies and procedures. It's important to review company policies. Make sure you've got a menopause policy in place, something that employees can refer to, ensuring that they know that they're supported in the workplace, and also helpful for managers to understand kind of processes there. Ensuring members of staff receive equality and diversity training, which is key, and menopause training. And a case of also reviewing company sickness absence policies to ensure that they don't discriminate against employees going through the menopause. Employers have trigger systems in place where a certain number of absences will trigger a sickness review. So it's important to make sure that those processes don't discriminate against those employees that have been off for related reasons. And then last but not least, a case of reviewing harassment and bullying policies and ensuring that employees receive appropriate training, making sure, like that earlier case, that employees aren't humiliated or ridiculed because of their experience. And then just to kind of summarise, and Laila mentioned this earlier in terms of how the OMC can help you. So the OMC can help support employers and employees in several ways. So you'll see on the slide, we've got mention there of their 1-hour lunch and learn sessions. They've got e-learning support and mentorship training as well as surveys and menopause workplace audits. And they can also assist with policy creation. And then last but not least, affordable and convenient HRT treatment. And of course, their website is very useful, contains some blogs, videos and case studies. So we certainly advise checking that out. And last but not least, before we get on to the Q&A section, how can we at Berry Smith help you? We can help support employers and employees in a number of ways, whether that be by preparing and implementing menopause policies and related policies, like I mentioned, sickness absence, harassment and bullying, helping to avoid employment tribunal claims where perhaps things haven't been dealt with properly or things have gone wrong. Also with advice and assistance with difficult issues, so any absence and performance concerns perhaps where menopause is a factor. We also provide legal updates, so if you aren't signed up to our monthly employment newsletter, drop us an email and we can add you to the list. And we also do help individual employees as well as employers and can assist with discrimination, harassment and victimisation issues. So just a bit of a summary there. And then I'm going to pass over to our chair, Sarah, who is going to go through some of the questions. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and Sarah will then pick some out for us, the panel, to answer.
Thank you ever so much, Caitlin. Yes, we've got around 8 minutes or so for a little bit of a discussion session, really, via the Q&A. I appreciate it's type your answers rather than bring everyone in. I think we've probably got too many participants on the call to open it up. We have got 2 questions I see, which we'll go through, but do feel free, please do use the Q&A function, even if you just want to include your thoughts perhaps as well, but by all means. But we'll go through a query and some insights from a participant. I think this conversation, she says, extends beyond menopause. Many industries running with outdated patriarchal models of management and operation. In fact, women have different hormonal cycles to men. The systems we work within are based on male cycles. Well, I tend to agree with that. A truly productive workforce will be built around supporting maximum productivity of every member of staff, with flex in higher periods of high productivity, lower periods with the workforce age, gender, disability all considered. Creating a truly holistic, creating a holistic, truly supportive environment and aware working culture, improving staff retention and well-being, acknowledging and understanding difference. So the question is, thank you for your thoughts there, Susanna. The question is, how can we move towards a more cyclical and educated approach in the workplace? That's a very good question. Laila, have you got any comments on that?
Yeah, that is actually a very good thought and comment before the question, and I think we all agree with what that person has said. Of course, any change starts with education and raising awareness, helping, not as I explained in the first one of the slides at the start of my talk was about how menopause is everyone's business. So not to shy away from just opening the topic and talking about it as normal as it is, because every single woman will go through this phase in life. It's a transitional time in life, and very similar to other physiological processes that we go through. For example, women who do get pregnant, for pregnancy, maternity, they tend to be very positive workplace conversations. They're quite lighthearted, happy usually. And so we should try to reach the same level as comfort and positiveness about talking about menopause in the workplace as well. And you achieve it by opening the discussion, by inviting everyone to come to, not to form small groups attended just by people going through that phase, but in fact, in opening it to all and considering asking your male colleagues, younger colleagues, older colleagues, everyone to attend it, because it's not, it's something, it's not something that happens just for a couple of weeks and then that's it. You can take a treatment and you no longer have a issue. So the more that the person going through it, the more they feel understood, and the more they're, the environment is open to talk about it and to within reasonable whatever is reasonable for that particular workplace. If they can adjust the work to support her, you reach that level of inclusivity and support. So that comes with variety. I mean, Caitlin and Helena very nicely explained about the various types of support that you can, practical things that you can implement at workplace. And it really depends on, one of the things that in my experience has been really helpful for a lot of workplaces has been the mentorship training, for example, because, to have a mentor within your own workplace that has a deeper understanding of this, that can facilitate, discussions, talks, webinars, and signpost the colleagues who are really struggling with symptoms to correct information, to correct support. That's how, I think it's a good start to achieving that.
Thank you, Laila. It's quite interesting. Laila and I were chatting before the call, actually, and Laila made a very good point that perhaps menopause awareness is perhaps where mental health awareness was 10 to 15 years ago. So it's going to take time in terms of the education and the changes and the support that's put in place, and watch this space. So thank you, Laila. Helen, Caitlin, do you want to pick this one up? Given there is such a variety of menopausal symptoms, as we've heard from Laila, I've got to be fair, I've learned a couple of new ones, so thank you. Where do we even start with a menopause policy, particularly given that so many GPs are not very well versed in diagnosing when someone is in perimenopause until it is very severe? It's quite interesting, Helen, that you should mention that, because I think Laila was mentioning that menopause isn't actually a topic studied at university for GPs, is it? So it's quite interesting you should say that. Caitlin, do you want to just pick up a bit about where do you start, I suppose, with a policy? I suppose it's more holistic, isn't it, rather than
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many symptoms, as Laila has said, that you can't kind of encompass everything. But what the menopause policy essentially would do is to signpost to external support, but to also make the employees in the workplace aware that this is something that the employer is taking seriously, and lots of employees will appreciate that on a personal level. As Laila said, it could be a case of appointing a menopause kind of wellbeing officer, and with the policies it's a case of more to do with highlighting the fact that the menopause is in existence in the workplace to managers who perhaps aren't quite aware of the ins and outs of it, and kind of the training comes into that then in terms of the policy. The policy is more there as a overview, look, we're here to support you, and kind of processes to follow. So in terms of actually getting the clogs moving here and putting those policies into place, get in touch. It's something that we can help with, and it kind of starts the conversation. I think the policy is a good place to start. It makes employees aware that this is something we're taking seriously and gets the conversation going, and then that will then maybe prompt employees to come forward, share their experiences and say, oh, actually, I have been struggling with brain fog. You've perhaps noticed a dip in my performance, and then that will open up conversations in that respect, I think, really. Yeah.
And hopefully then that will come into Susanna's earlier question. That will hopefully then embed into the culture, because that culture piece isn't going to change overnight. It's a long-term thing. So it's is definitely all about normalise, well, first and foremost, understanding the issues that women go through, give you the better knowledge, and then to be able to go on to make informed decisions, have those conversations to then build into and look to change the culture. And obviously once you start putting those policies in place, management training is also extremely helpful and goes alongside that, okay, to increase awareness and knowledge. We're nearly at 11 o'clock. I think time for one more question. Because it's quite a few. I mean, I appreciate we're not going to get to all of these questions, but please do pick up with us after the session. We're more than happy to assist, okay.
Sarah, is it possible to maybe answer, any clinical or relevant that I can answer, I can email?
Yes.
Answers. So I don't know whether we can capture the questions on the, there are quite a few that are coming through.
There are quite a few, yeah, we'll see if we can, I'm sure we can, is the long and short. Keith, no doubt we will have a look at that. So what we can do then after this is perhaps have a look and come back separately on the questions. That's fine. I notice it's coming up 12 o'clock, so we will come back to you on them. Good. I think that all that remains for me is to say thank you. Thank you ever so much to our panelists, Caitlin, Elena, Laila, and Keith as well, our marketing manager, and Simon, the marketing manager for the Online Menopause Centre, in helping get today on the road and sort out the technology side of things, which is a lot more stressful than talking. So thank you. And thank you to all those that have attended. I think we said we had just shy of 90 sign up, which is one of the largest attendees we've had for a session. I think it just goes to show this is really a topic that is gaining momentum, and whereby employers just want to understand more to help their employees and try and retain that talent within the workplace. Thank you, and we'll send a recording out of the session. So you've got that should you or colleagues wish to listen to it after.